Look at you. Even the coffee spilled on you is more valuable than your clothes." A sudden, deathly silence fell in the restaurant. As hot coffee dripped down Keanu Reeves' shirt, the waiter shook his head with a mocking laugh. "This place isn't for people like you. Did you think you belong here?" The customers around started whispering. Some were watching in amusement, while others turned their heads in embarrassment. But Keanu Reeves said nothing. He simply looked the waiter straight in the eyes, and in that moment, everyone thought the same thing. This arrogant man was about to pay a heavy price for the mistake he just made. Hey, you! You're listening to this story, and it's clearly caught your attention. But I noticed something. You still haven't subscribed. And honestly, that really saddens me. You can't listen to such a great story and not subscribe, right? Come on, leave a like and subscribe. That way, we can spread Keanu Reeves' inspiring life lessons to millions. Now, let's dive into the story. The restaurant gleamed with luxurious elegance. Crystal chandeliers, polished wooden tables, and the scent of expensive perfume filling the air. Everyone who walked in here felt they were in an exclusive environment. And at that very moment, splash! A cup of coffee poured over Keanu Reeves' chest like a hot wave. Look at you. Even the coffee spilled on you is more valuable than your clothes. The waiter laughed and shook his head. He didn't even try to make it seem like an accident. With a condescending smile, he scanned Keanu from head to toe. The surrounding tables suddenly fell silent. Patrons dressed in luxury clothing lifted their heads, curiously watching the scene unfold. Some looked on in shock, while others began whispering, seemingly amused. But Keanu Reeves said nothing. He didn't get angry, shout, or step back. He simply looked at the coffee stain on his shirt, then slowly lifted his gaze. The waiter, puckering his lips, placed his hands on his hips. "Are you waiting for an apology? For someone like you? Look at you!" All eyes turned to Keanu. Who was this man? Why wasn't he reacting? And most importantly, what would happen now? No one could have predicted what was about to happen. Because this arrogant waiter was about to pay a very, very heavy price for his mistake. The silence in the restaurant grew increasingly uncomfortable. As the customers at the tables watched, the mocking smile on the waiter's face became even more pronounced. "What's wrong? Did you swallow your tongue?" he sneered. "Or are you actually expecting an apology?" Keanu Reeves didn't budge. The coffee spilled on his chest had stained his shirt, but he didn't say a single word. He simply stared into the waiter's eyes. His silence didn't carry any hint of defeat, as the waiter expected, but a strange kind of authority. This silence created a peculiar tension in the restaurant. The customers around started reacting differently. Some secretly looked down on Keanu. "What's he even doing here?" some whispered. Others felt uncomfortable. "Hasn't the waiter gone too far?" they thought, but no one spoke up. A few people pulled out their phones and started recording the scene, but Keanu was still silent. This only fueled the waiter's frustration. He rolled his eyes and spoke loudly so everyone could hear. "Do you know what I'm going to do? I'll give you another table. Actually, let me do something better. There's an empty spot in the back of the restaurant. I'm sure it will be much more suitable for someone like you." Some of the restaurant's customers quietly laughed. A few nodded, as if agreeing with the waiter. But Keanu still said nothing. He simply listened to the waiter's words calmly, never changing his expression. And then, at that exact moment, the restaurant manager noticed what was going on. A well-dressed woman who had been watching from the door furrowed her brow and quickly approached. She realized this was a mistake, but it was too late, because soon this waiter would learn a lesson he would never forget. As the restaurant manager approached quickly, the waiter continued speaking with confidence. "Look, buddy," he said with a condescending expression, "places like this are a bit, how should I put it, focused on quality. This is a bit different from the cafes you're used to." Keanu Reeves continued to silently watch the waiter, without even blinking. This reaction only provoked the waiter more. The customers at the tables were watching the encounter with increasing attention. Some were disturbed by what the waiter was saying, but still kept silent. Most were wondering when Keanu would finally get angry and respond. The waiter took another step forward and leaned in even more. "If you're waiting for an apology, forget it. We're serving real customers here. Even the coffee spilled on you is worth more than your shirt. So, the best thing for you would be to quietly leave." At that moment, the restaurant manager arrived with firm steps. "What's going on here?" he asked. The waiter smiled lightly and shrugged, as if nothing had happened. "Nothing, just a little misunderstanding. I was just helping guide our guests for their comfort." The manager squinted at Keanu Reeves, turning his attention to him. He hadn't noticed before, but now he realized who the man in front of him was. His expression changed instantly. The waiter, still unaware of the situation, laughed mockingly. "I don't know what he's doing here, but this isn't the place for him." But within seconds, everything was about to change. The manager turned to the waiter with a cold expression. "Do you have any idea what you're doing right now?" The easygoing expression on the waiter's face slowly began to fade, because soon he was going to pay a very, very heavy price for his mistake. The mocking smile on the waiter's face slowly began to fade as he noticed the cold expression in the restaurant manager's eyes. "I don't understand what you mean, ma'am," he stammered. The manager spoke without taking her eyes off him for a second. "Do you have any idea what you're doing right now?" The customers in the restaurant were watching with curiosity. The silence was so thick that the faint music playing in the back of the restaurant could sharply be heard. The manager turned to Keanu Reeves and, now fully realizing who he was, tilted her head slightly. "Mr. Reeves, I'm so sorry. I hope you can forgive us for this awful situation." Some of the customers looked at each other in shock. Whispers started to rise. "What? Keanu Reeves? No way. Is it really him?" The waiter, on the other hand, was suddenly out of breath. The man he had just belittled, disrespected, was a world-famous actor. Now, everyone around him was watching. As the whispers grew louder, the waiter's color began to drain from his face. I didn't know," he stammered, stepping back. But it was already too late. The manager's voice took control of the entire restaurant. "Not knowing doesn't lessen your mistake. Who gave you the right to judge a customer based on their clothes, their silence, or the assumptions in your head?" The waiter cleared his throat, trying to say something, but no words came out. Keanu Reeves, still maintaining his calm demeanor, didn't take his eyes off the waiter. He slightly tilted his head to the side. "If you want to apologize, you should do it, not to me, but to the people watching here. Because today, not only did you harm me, but you also harmed your own conscience." In that moment, the waiter was facing the heaviest lesson of his life, and in the restaurant, Keanu Reeves's words echoed. The air in the restaurant grew heavier. The manager's harsh words and Keanu Reeves's silent yet powerful response hit the waiter like a slap across the face. "If you want to apologize, you should do it, not to me, but to the people watching here." The waiter's breath quickened. An uncontrollable panic began to rise within him. As he looked around, he realized that every customer had their eyes locked on him. The man who had been so confident just moments ago, making mocking remarks, was now gone. In his place stood someone who had only just realized the magnitude of his mistake. I just wanted to make a joke," he mumbled. But this wasn't a joke, and everyone knew it. The manager crossed his arms over his chest. "So, a joke? Well, do you think the people here found it funny?" The waiter desperately glanced around. No one was laughing. In that moment, dark clouds seemed to descend upon him. People began whispering. Did he really have to act so arrogant? How right is it to judge someone just by their clothes? If someone like Keanu Reeves can be treated like this, imagine what an ordinary person goes through. The discomfort gnawing at the waiter grew. Keanu Reeves was still looking at him. He wasn't angry. He was just waiting. The waiter swallowed and lowered his eyes to the floor. "I'm sorry," he whispered. But his voice was so faint that no one heard him. The manager shook his head. An apology means true regret. If it's not coming from within, it's better not to speak at all. The waiter felt a warm wave spread across his face. Shame was eating away at him. And then, at that moment, the waiter realized he couldn't just settle for an apology. He needed to do more. He stepped forward, took a deep breath, and spoke with a clear voice that echoed through the restaurant. "I apologize to everyone. The person who didn't deserve to be here was not Keanu Reeves. It's me. I'm the one who doesn't deserve to represent this restaurant." The entire restaurant fell silent in an instant. The manager nodded slowly, his face showing a mixture of surprise and approval. This was a sign that the waiter was finally feeling true remorse. Keanu Reeves squinted his eyes slightly. He weighed the words spoken, and finally, with a slight smile, he nodded. The waiter felt his heart pounding in his chest, but at least, now he was truly regretful, and everyone could see it. The waiter's words echoed through the restaurant. The person who doesn't deserve to be here wasn't Keanu Reeves. It's me. I'm the one who doesn't deserve to represent this restaurant. Everyone watched silently. The tension in the restaurant hadn't dissipated. The manager paused for a moment as he processed the waiter's words, and then a brief silence followed. And then, at that moment, Keanu Reeves took a deep breath and stepped forward. Apologizing is difficult. But what's harder than an apology is truly deciding to change, he said, his voice firm yet gentle. The waiter couldn't quite comprehend Keanu's words. Was he implying something? Or was he just trying to end the conversation? But Keanu continued. "I have an offer for you." Everyone in the restaurant jumped in surprise. Even the manager raised his eyebrows and looked at Keanu. The waiter blinked in confusion. "An offer?" he asked, his voice still trembling. Keanu nodded without taking his eyes off the waiter. "I know you're feeling awful right now. You want to take responsibility for what you've done, but you can't do that with just a few words. If you really want to change something, then prove it." The waiter was breathless. "What do you mean?" Keanu smiled slightly. "Work with me." In that moment, the only sound that could be heard in the restaurant was the waiter's accelerated breathing. Some of the customers started whispering, "What? Is he serious? Keanu Reeves is hiring him?" Wait, can someone like him really work with Keanu? The waiter opened his mouth but couldn't speak. For a few seconds, he stared at Keanu with a stunned expression. I, what do you mean? Are you kidding? Keanu Reeves shook his head slightly. I don't joke. For a moment, the waiter didn't know what to say. Just moments ago, he had experienced one of the most humiliating moments of his life, and now he felt like he was inside a movie scene. But why? He stammered. Keanu Reeves spoke without taking his eyes off him. Because you deserve a second chance. But what matters is how you use that chance. For the first time, the waiter took a truly deep breath. Hundreds of thoughts raced through his mind. There was no reason for this man to make such an offer to him, but still, he was doing it. And in that moment, the waiter realized he was standing on the edge of the biggest decision of his life. The waiter's mind was in chaos. Just moments ago, Keanu Reeves had offered him a chance that could change his life. But why? He had treated him badly, mocked him, humiliated him, and now, was he being given a second chance? Everyone in the restaurant was waiting in intense curiosity. Even the manager, with a stunned expression, had his arms crossed and was watching what would happen next. Work with me. Keanu's voice was still echoing in the waiter's ears. There was a strange feeling inside him. Part of him wanted to reject the offer and escape the humiliation he had just experienced. But the other part, this was an opportunity to change something in his life. He took a deep breath. He lifted his head and looked into Keanu's eyes. But why me? He asked. Keanu Reeves smiled slightly. Because mistakes don't define a person. What defines you is what you learn from them. The waiter's eyes widened. A silence fell over the restaurant. The manager, the customers, the other waiters. Everyone was trying to absorb this answer. But I don't deserve this, the waiter said, his voice faint. Keanu Reeves shook his head. Whether you deserve it or not, you will decide that. If you truly want to change, you'll make the most of this opportunity. The waiter's hands were trembling. He took a deep breath. His heart was pounding as if it were going to burst. He thought for a moment, what if he rejected it? It would just be a momentary memory, forgotten in time. But if he accepted it, for the first time, he would have a real chance to make a big change in his life. He squeezed his eyes shut. He swallowed. And then he lifted his head. His eyes were filled with tears, but this time it wasn't from shame. It was from the weight of making a decision. I accept. Everyone in the restaurant held their breath. The manager blinked in disbelief. The customers began to whisper. Is he serious? He's going to work with Keanu Reeves. Is that for real? Can this guy's life really change? The waiter still felt in shock. But for the first time, he felt that what he had just done was the right thing. Keanu Reeves nodded slightly. You made a good choice, he said. But remember, this is just the beginning. And in that moment, the waiter truly understood what he had just done. This was the beginning of a new life for him. As the waiter stepped out of the restaurant, a strange feeling washed over him. Just a few minutes ago, he had experienced the most embarrassing moment of his life. But now, somehow, he was on the threshold of a new beginning. Keanu Reeves' offer was real. He still had trouble believing it. As they stepped outside, Keanu took a deep breath and put on his familiar calm smile. We're just getting started, he said, turning his eyes to the waiter. The waiter looked at him in confusion. What are we going to do? Keanu tilted his head slightly. "What are we going to do?" he repeated. "First, you need to understand this. The biggest lessons in life aren't learned in fancy places, but in ordinary moments." The waiter furrowed his brows. "I don't understand." Keanu reached into his pocket and pulled out some bills. "We're going to lunch," he said, his eyes shining. The waiter still didn't fully understand, but he couldn't object. Walking side by side with Keanu Reeves, they entered a small, casual cafe a few blocks away from the restaurant. There were no fancy crystal glasses or luxurious tablecloths here. Ordinary people were sipping their tea after work. Old movie posters adorned the walls, and the air was filled with the subtle scent of coffee. The waiter looked around in disbelief. "This is it?" Keanu Reeves nodded. "This is it." Then he looked the waiter in the eyes and gave him his first real lesson. How you see people is how you see the world. If you only value places with glamour, you'll miss the real values. The waiter took a deep breath. Maybe. He had been looking at things all wrong until now. And maybe this was the beginning of a change that would truly make a difference in his life. As the waiter reflected on Keanu Reeves's words, he took in the warm scent of coffee around him. Up until now, he had always been accustomed to seeing life from the outside. He judged people based on their clothes, cars, and where they sat. But maybe real value was somewhere beyond all this show. They sat in silence. The waiter's fingers were tightly wrapped around his coffee cup. Something was stirring inside him. His own voice echoed in his mind. "Who am I, really?" Keanu noticed the waiter's thoughts. He quietly took a sip of coffee and then locked eyes with him. "How you look on the outside doesn't matter," he said, his voice low but impactful. "What matters is what you carry inside." The waiter looked up. He felt as though those words weighed on him. For his entire life, he had been concerned with how others saw him. The value others placed on him had been more important than his own self-worth. Now, the man in front of him was telling him that true value came from within, not from the outside. The waiter involuntarily smiled. "Is it really that simple?" he asked. Keanu Reeves tilted his head slightly. "The truth is always simple. What's hard is accepting it." The waiter paused for a moment. He thought about it. Maybe for his entire life he had been chasing the wrong things. Bright lights, expensive possessions, flashy places. But now, sitting across from this man with a cup of coffee, he realized that true wealth had nothing to do with any of that. He took a deep breath. The voice inside him no longer whispered. It was shouting. He needed to make a decision. He looked straight at Keanu Reeves. "I'm not going to be the same anymore," he said. Keanu smiled slightly. "Just saying that is already a new beginning." The waiter took a sip of his coffee. As the warm liquid flowed down his throat, a sense of peace washed over him. This was the moment when a new chapter of his life began. For the first time, there wasn't an emptiness inside him. There was hope.